Right, hello, welcome back to another video. So last time we had a look at how we made the different meshes that we've used in this scene, exporting things from Unreal, bringing them into Maya, using that as sort of like a reference guide in order to build up the various bits of geometry. And this time we're actually going to start making that material. So up here was where I worked in the scene, working with Ben, with the things that Ben has provided, I should say. And actually what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take another waterfall a bit lower down. That one was done. Where's the next one in the list? It's probably here. It's be a bit shallow, this one. Still useful. Let's find one that's got a bit more of a fall to it. There we are. This is a good one here. And we're just going to start setting this one up. Now, one thing that I use all the time in Unreal is camera shortcuts. So up here we have any cameras that might be in the scene. If I create one camera, you can obviously place this where you want, and then you can jump to that camera at any time and have a look through what's happening. But you also have, let's delete that, these things here, camera bookmarks. And what this is, if I just find where my bit of water is that I want to do, this one here, what I can do is I can place the viewport camera, and then I can just press Control 1 on the keyboard. And what that's going to do is it's going to save that camera location in memory as a bookmark, and now whenever I press the one button, it's going to jump back to that location. And so it just means that when you're building kind of your effects or your scenes, you can save a few key positions. You can see here I've saved quite a few. I've ever written a couple just now, but it gives you a very nice quick way of jumping around a scene. You don't really want to, especially the way Unreal sometimes handles movement, you don't want to spend loads of your time flying around the scene like this, looking at different angles. So you save yourself a few camera angles out first, and you can jump back and forth. And you can do things like having a nice aerial shot. That's cool. Maybe a long shot. It just very quickly allows you to kind of see your effects or your scene from lots of different angles without having to spend ages flying the camera around and things. So we're going to build up this waterfall here, and the first thing we're going to do is add this base mesh. Now this obviously has the completed material on it, but if I just go through and clear that out, put the default material, and then we'll build our own up on top of that in a second. Now this is going to go between these two meshes. So if I select these three, in the visibility command, you've got show only selected. Now this isn't defaulted to Shift H. This is something I've edited manually in the keyboard shortcuts. If you go editor preferences, keyboard shortcuts, show only, and I've set that there. So Shift H normally is unhide, but I don't like that. I don't think unhide's a very useful command. The only way you can select something to unhide is by going up to the outliner, and there you've also got this button. So this is how I unhide individual assets. And so I've changed Shift H to be show only selected, which I find really useful and I use all the time. So up to you if you want to do that. If not, in visibility, show only selected is there. You can do it with the right click menu, and that works as well. So now I've got these two meshes. I'm just going to eyeball these in and set that into the right place. So I know that this pivot here wants to exist on the top of this. And then I'll rotate that around, probably matching the bottom plane. Could have matched one or the other. You could go in and you could make some kind of like bent versions of this, as we saw in Maya. Very easy to sort of make another version, maybe one that's got a little bit of a bend on, put a bend deformer on it, bend it slightly, and that might give you a bit more of a better fit, but it's probably forgiving enough that this will work. And there we are. I'm just going to line that up as such, somewhere average between the two maybe. Cool. Shift H to unhide, and then 1 and 2, just jump around, have a look, see if that fits. It's a bit wide. We'll scale that in so it just fits the edges, and that's the for now. So we're going to make a new material. I don't know. I tend to call things class when I'm doing presentations, so let's keep that naming convention live, and then we're just going to call this waterfall base. Just apply it here. Now, in this instance, Ben obviously kindly provided a scene which gave me a little bit of stuff to work with. So looking at the water material he's made, one of the important things with water is different rendering types, how it is approached. So I was able to go in here and have a look, and he's using a translucent material, and then he's enabled screen shaped reflections, and he's also set to surface translucency volume. Now this is the most expensive kind of lighting. Well, it's a very expensive. I'm not sure if it's more expensive than forward shading. Depends on what your other things are happening. But it's actually quite an expensive rendering thing. So if we go back to our material, and if I just quickly change this to translucent, what you will find, if we have a look at our input pin, the key to sort of water materials is a scrolling normal map. So the normals are moving, and it makes it look like the surface is undulating, and that's what makes it look kind of water-like. But if I bring in a normal map here, I have a few different water normals. That one. We can't plug this in. This isn't going to work. We can make the connection, but it's grayed out. It's not being used. And why is that? Well, when you're using a translucent blend mode, there's different lighting modes for this, and so it defaults to the cheapest, and that's this volumetric non-directional. And if we tooltip over it and have a look, it says here, use on particle effects like smoke and dust. Lighting will be calculated for a volume without directionality, so we need directional lighting in order for the normals to work, so this isn't going to work. We go down here, we have volumetric directional. That will give us the ability to use our normals, but it's still not the right kind of lighting probably. What we want is this surface translucency volume. It even says in the tooltip, used for things like glass and water. And that will allow us now to put our normals in and see this update. Now you will notice it is incredibly slow, or a lot slower to render. And so because of that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work with an opaque shader for a little while just to get my normals working. And then I can always change that back to translucence. Up to you if you want to sort of deal with the wait times. Can be a little bit tedious depending. It's not so bad when I'm not recording, and so your kind of mileage may vary, but obviously no one really wants to see dead air waiting around for shaders to compile. So for now, I'm just going to set this to a opaque shader. Opaque shader allows us to use the normals. This is going to compile much quicker, and there we are. Now we can build up our scrolling normals. Again, looking through Ben's material that he provided, he's using a normal map here, the water new height, and that's going to be controlling the surface. We're just going to use the same one, try and create that continuity. So if I change this to water new height, that will give us the same kind of watery normals. Now this is static, that doesn't really work. So what we want to do is create a panner. Now this is the node that moves things in textures in our material editor, and it needs to have some speed. Now I know from making my meshes that I've got the UVs aligned sort of vertically, and so I want the water texture to scroll vertically. So I'm going to put a bit of speed in Y and just a little bit. Now that's the wrong direction, but that's fine. We'll just do a negative number. -0.2. Now, whatever these numbers are, we're going to create parameters to allow us to dynamically edit these on the fly. Different waterfalls might want different speeds, that kind of thing. But just a quick value in there will give us some movement. Now, it doesn't look particularly watery yet. It's looking okay. But the trick is for scrolling normals, or to make scrolling normals work, make it look watery, is if you take two sets of texture, and we're just going to scroll them at slightly different speeds. So one's slightly faster than the other, and we're just going to blend these together. And so there's a function that does this, blend angle corrected normals. If I do that, it's just going to take the component of the first part and blend it with the second one, and you can see, hopefully, if I show this grid off, we're getting this kind of much more realistic approach, or more realistic thing now. The two normal maps are scrolling at the same or different speeds, and moving through each other, and it's giving us this illusion of movement of water, which is pretty cool. And if we look closely, every so often there's going to be a really horrible pause, and that's going to be, wait a second, there, and you can see that there's two things completely break, and the illusion just fails completely. Now what's happening there is the two textures, although they're moving at different speeds, at some point they're going to completely line up, and then they look really bad because the illusion of movement just disappears. So what we want to do is multiply one of these by a slightly different scale. Now we haven't plugged in any coordinates, haven't plugged in any tiling, and the default in Unreal, when you haven't plugged anything in, is just that the default text chord is kind of plugged in automatically. And it says it here in the tooltip, defaults to constant coordinate if not specified. Well, that's another name for this, this text chord node. So now this one's plugged in, all I can do, if I just multiply it by a very small amount, now this is a sort of little magic number, what's going to happen now is this texture is ever so slightly bigger. And so when that would come to that complete sort of pause, it will never line up exactly with the other one, and so you'll never get that kind of little sort of stuttery pause. Up to you what you put in here. Doesn't want to be massively different. If this was kind of twice the size, it might look a bit weird, or maybe look better. I don't know, up to you. But what we don't want is that kind of exactly the same size, because you'll get that weird stutter. Cool. We just apply this and have a look at how it looks on our mesh. You can see, although we've used a square in our material preview, this mesh is anything but square, and so we need some way of controlling the X and Y tiling independently to try and get that texture back to square in the viewport. And so this is kind of like one across here, maybe 3 or 4 across there. Now there's a couple of choices we can do for this. We could just manually edit the values in here and say like, okay, well that's going to be 3 across. And we'll see it'll look a bit odd here in the preview, but when we apply it, that stretching that we've applied here in the material is then going to get unstretched once it's applied to the mesh. And we're getting that back as a because the UVs are sort of also stretched in the same way the meshes or the textures have been stretched, and that's kind of working. That's looking more square, but we can also give ourselves dynamic control of that as well. So what I might do is just create a couple of parameters, and I call this tiling X, S-click for scalar parameter, tiling Y. Now this is UVs, this is a vector 2 or a float 2 depending on your sort of terminology. There's 2 parts, a U part and a V part, or an X and Y. I guess they should be tiling U and tiling V, shouldn't it? U and X and V and Y are kind of interchangeable. Tiling U, tiling V, but it doesn't really matter, it's only a name. But if we append these two together, now these will be also a vector 2, and I'm able to multiply those by our text chord. Plug it to here and here. Now this is broken because I don't have any values in here. And there we are. So it's up to you. Probably I would set this back to 1 and then set this to 3. It's going to give you the exact same result, but now we're doing that tiling in this parameter. And because it's a parameter, we can change that per instance, and we can also change it dynamically and see that happening real time in the viewport. So we just want to create something maybe, yeah, a bit higher. And obviously we can scale the other way as well. If we do scale this by quite a lot, it's going to slow down because the size of it and how fast it's moving are kind of related to each other. And so as well as having the ability to change these tilings and adjust the texture, we probably want the ability to change our speed as well. And that's easily done. So these values in here, they are exposed. They're exposed by this speed value here, which is relatively new in the history of Unreal, and I don't use it. I tend to use time instead. So similarly to how the text chord is automatically plugged into coordinates if you don't plug anything in, time defaults to time. So there is a time node, and that is what these things default to if you don't plug anything in. Well, I have plugged them in now, but that doesn't do anything because things being affected. But now I have this time value out here. What I can do is just multiply it by a parameter, and I'm just going to call this speed. So I'm controlling the time, or the game time, before I plug it in. So time of 0, or time multiplied by a speed of 0, won't have any movement at all. Half speed, it's going to be nice and slow. Very fast speed, I can make it really, really rapid water. And that again gives us control of our parameters, so we can make different instances for different waterfalls. I can change my tiling, I can change my tiling that way, and I can change my speed depending. So just going to find something that sort of works. Whenever I'm doing this kind of work, there's always a sort of two-part process. One is setting up the material to do the things you want, and then it's plugging in the numbers to make it kind of look right. And that's not bad. That'll do for now. Maybe change this tiling up a little bit more, trying to match the kind of size and shape of the ripples here a little bit better. It's now too fast. It's too slow. Something like that. I don't want to spend ages kind of playing with this. Now, that works as a good base. I just apply and save that. A couple more things we might want to do. Currently, we're only doing scrolling in the Y. So the water's kind of completely moving linearly, and that works. It's fine. We've fixed any kind of pausing issues where the two things line up. We could also add just a little touch of movement in the X direction. Now, if we go a little bit in X in one, we want to go a little bit in minus X in the other. And so now the two things are going to be scrolling against each other. A bit difficult to see up here. I might just set this back to 1 by 1 for 1 now. And so now if I just redo that. And there we are. So this is now completely linear. If we had a little bit of movement in X, see one of our shaders or one of our textures is moving this way, and you can kind of feel that a little bit, that there's some horizontal movement. And then if we do the opposite direction on the opposite one, and you can now see there's just a little bit more life as they're moving kind of like across each other. And then it's up to us how many of these we want to add. So what I might do is have a couple of normals here. If I just double check on the material that I made, I believe I did third, yeah. So you've got, oh, possibly even fourth, fifth. I know that's to do with the waterfall, fine. So you have your two scrolling normals, and then I've just got another one at a different resolution, giving it a bit more detail. Very simple. We want to kind of use the same normal map, probably. Could load in another normal map. Let's say that one maybe. That's going to be visually more sort of accurate, or more kind of look better, shall we say, because it's going to have more detail and more variety, but it is going to cost us another texture sample, so it's adding a lot more cost as well. So we can reuse the same one. Obviously nicer to do that. And I'm just going to call this, let's say, detail normal. So how do I want to do this? Well, let's just plug it in as a manual thing. I don't want any horizontal movement. And let's put this really slow and see how that works. A bit too slow. Now we've blended these normals together. We're just going to do the same thing and blend the new normal in. But I want to create a control for this. How much of this normal do I want to have? Well, if I take this normal, if I multiply it and multiply it by a value, normal, let's go to detail, normal, strength, So if we're blending this in, we can see it happening there. If I try and increase the values of this detail normal, it's not going to do anything, because what's actually happening with a normal map is it's encoding a vector. It's encoding the surface orientation, and so by multiplying it by a large value, that doesn't change the direction of the thing. So let's not save this. So if I take, for example, a plane, I'm going to duplicate that. I'm just going to go in and create a nice noisy surface. So I'm going to do a transform random as such. So if we imagine this is our kind of high poly bake, and this is what we've baked it down to, every pixel, it's going to take the direction of this surface, and then it's going to kind of transfer that into color data and assign it to that pixel. So if I create just a quick cylinder, oops, just put that over here, do this. So this is my normal vector, that surface. You can see here along this edge here, this is sort of the direction of that surface, and that direction has then been kind of represented by this vector here, and if I take that, kind of like bring that down, that will then get encoded into the pixel color of the normal map. Now if I take this direction and I scale it up and multiply it, which is what I've been doing in the shader, it doesn't change the direction at all, which is why multiplying a normal map doesn't make it any stronger, because you're just making the directions longer, but the longer direction still encodes the same direction, if that makes sense. So what we need to do, rather than having this be multiplied, and that's how I make our normals stronger, we need to blend these two together. And so if I just duplicate this again, you can see this being completely flat, this being a sort of a value of 1, and we can sort of blend between those, and that's how we're going to change the actual data in the normals. So we're actually changing the direction data that the normal map's been coded, rather than the just increasing the length of those vectors. And it's very simple to do. So if it's a bit confusing with the maths, don't worry about it too much. But just know that if we want to control the strength of a normal, rather than multiplying it, we need to lerp it. We're going to lerp it and blend it with 0, 0, 1. And so 0, 0, 1, it's going to appear as blue. Well, it's not actually blue. We're not using it as a color. What that is the direction for straight up. So if I imagine my flat plane, the direction of all of these normals is perfectly up, because there's no kind of slope and curve to that whatsoever. So if I blend from that to that, now if I go in here and do my normal strength, 50 is going to be horrifically big, as you can see, but we'll be able to control how strong that detail normal is. If we put that up something quite high, you can see it's now having a real kind of effect. 0 is going to give us just blue, not going to do anything. And so we can control as much or as little as you want of that sort of detail normal. Cool, let's put that back up to whatever it was, 12. 12. Look. So that is how I've built up the normals of our surface. I'm just going to comment that one out. Up to you how much detail you want to kind of go in and add. Maybe moving a bit fast. We'll obviously come back and edit these a bit later once we've got the right blend mode on, set these things. I think the detail normals are a bit stretched because of the UV direction or the UV stretching. So let's put this in at like, something slightly different like that. And we might want to go in and obviously adjust the speeds of these things. And it's up to you how much you want to add. 2 normal maps scrolling is the bare minimum to create kind of the illusion of motion, but you can have as many as you want. You are adding instructions as long as you're using the same normal map at a different scale, resolution and speed. You're not adding too much. We just compare this here. So that is 156 and 230. We try this 138 and 212. So it's not adding a huge amount of instructions to have another set here. If we're using a different normal map, that would create quite a big effect. And there we are. We're getting that coming in. Oh, that's mesh. Right. Yeah, we'll just quickly try that out with the translucent material, see how that looks. So I change this to translucent, surface translucency volume, turn on those screen space reflections, and it will take a little while to compile. It should give us some nice reflections. Hopefully blend in a little bit better. You can see here the compile times a little bit high. Well, a couple of problems. One is my opacity is full, and so we're getting full black object. Well, that's fine. I can put in an opacity value. If I set this to 0.1, we'll be doing some more stuff with opacity in future video, but just to preview this now, we'll just stick in a nice low opacity so we can see what this looks like. And again, we'll have to wait for this to kick in. Probably a bit too low. Probably the color of my water is too low. Well, let's leave that for now. Let's put it back to opaque. We need to do some other work to it to make it look kind of basic. But for now, if we just have to look at the normals, let's add a color and make it a bit more mid-gray. We need a few things to all work together to get that to work. So we'll cover that in a future video, make it more translucent. But you can see here now, we're getting that movement in the surface, we're getting that effect of scrolling normals. And we have full control of our tiling, a bit too tiled, in both directions independently, and our speed. And you can see here these detail normals which aren't being controlled by those parameters. And so we could create another set of parameters if we wanted, and obviously just turn that off or make it much stronger, depending on what we need to do. Cool. We shall leave it there for now. That is the normals part of this water material. Lots more to do, but we've been going for about half an hour now, so it seems like a good place to stop. As always, big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. Hopefully you've learned a few things, and I'll see you all next time for more water material.